Hey, what's up, guys? This is Mark. I'm back to talk about fantasy football again. So, if you go back and you watch the video that I just posted a few days ago, it was a live mock draft, and it shows basically my thought process of what I do for a 12-team PPR mock draft. So, in this video, I kind of follow up with it with the results, as you can see here, and I go into the strategy. So, real quick, and this is supposed to be kind of broken down so that way it's a little more illustrated than the way I explained. And this is basically the strategy that I use for the draft, and this is what I would recommend that you do as well. So that way you're prepared going into the live draft in your league with this mock draft strategy that I use. So let's start with the results from the last draft. A lot of it was seen on the video, but it had to be cut off because it took so long. I was not happy about that draft. But anyway, I started off Devontae Adams. The first round pick, second round pick was Juju Smith-Schuster, and then I took Nick Chubb, Stephon Diggs, Kenyon Drake, O.J. Howard, Golden Tate, which, as you remember me saying in the video previously, this came out before I found out about Golden Tate's suspension, so I'm sorry about that. I would not have taken Golden Tate this high had that already been known. There's been some other news that has happened as well that has changed some things, but just for the purposes of understanding my strategy, this is what I did in that video. Then I took Austin Eckler, which his value is going to be a lot higher, especially since Melvin Gordon recently demanded a trade. Geronimo Allison in the ninth round. And then I took Damian Harris, which is a little more of a strategic play for trades than anything. And then I took Paris Campbell, a rookie flyer at receiver. And then at that point the video cut off, and then in the rest of the draft I took the Chargers D in the 12th round. The 13th pick I took Kalen Ballage, and the reason I did that is because up here you see I already have Kenyon Drake, and basically what that is Ballage has a lot of potential as well, and if anything were to happen to Drake, I cover myself as a handcuff and have a decent potential running back as well. And then in the 14th round, I took Phillip Rivers, which I'm not a big Phillip Rivers fan, but I kind of was playing more of the stream game. And Phillip Rivers is somebody that is usually solid, but depending on what happens in the rest of in a game-by-game matchup, I may drop him, pick up somebody else. Kind of gives you some options because I was targeting more of these wide receivers, running backs earlier in the draft. And at running back, I took Duke Johnson. So the reason I took Duke Johnson is because, I predict that if he gets traded somewhere, his value is gonna increase. But partially because I have Nick Chubb too. If anything happens to Nick Chubb, it's a handcuff. And then, so my prediction is that Duke Johnson is gonna get traded to a team like the Chiefs and then immediately become their RB1. That's just what I think is going to happen, but I could see a multitude of situations where a team that needs a running back could trade for him. Another team that's possibly in consideration is Seattle. Maybe even San Diego if they trade out Melvin Gordon. Excuse me. Why do I keep calling them San Diego? They're LA. I hate that, but anyway. And then the last round I took Atlanta's kicker. I think that's a late round sleeper at kicker. So the question of the day is why am I so high on O.J. Howard? This is a question asked by Nathan. So he was wondering if I feel that Cameron Brate will still steal targets from him, and if Brate will potentially be the starter. So Cameron Brate is he's a system tight end that works well in Tampa Bay, and he is going to get some targets, but he's already kind of peaked in his prime, in my opinion. He's already kind of maxed out to be as good as he can. O.J. Howard is a potential play. So it kind of goes back to what I was talking about in one of the earlier videos about modest gains versus potential. Cameron Brate is a modest gain tight end who you know what he's going to give you, but he's not really going to ever exceed the value that he had 2 years ago. O.J. Howard, on the other hand, is a guy on the rise. They want to work him into the system more. So Cameron Brate may be the starter in week one or from time to time, but I think that overall this is O.J. Howard's offense, and that is why I'm very high on him. So don't be concerned with Cameron Brate and how he affects O.J. Howard, because I think that Cameron Brate is not really going to eat into the potential that O.J. Howard already shows on that team. So anyway, so now that we went over the results, let's take a look at my draft strategy. And this is basically what I do in the draft. I'm going to kind of shift over. And once again, I apologize about the absolutely poor quality of this camera, but then again, I don't have any kind of budget or anything, so I hope you forgive me, but if not, then I'm sorry. But anyway, so let's take a look at my draft strategy. So you can go ahead and screenshot this if you want, or write it down. But basically what I do in the draft is I start out and I do mock drafts. So number one is you want to do a mock draft of all the teams or you want to do a mock draft of the same league size and the same rules format. So if you're doing a PPR league, do PPR. If you're doing standard, do standard, because that's going to change the positioning of players. And then what I do is I print the results of that mock draft. After I print the results, I'm going to enter the draft lobby and get an idea of where I'm drafting. So you can enter your draft early and figure out like if you're drafting like first or somewhere in the middle or like somewhere at the end. So that gives that, and then once you have an idea of that, then you start the next step, which is step 4. You create a little mini draft board, which I'll kind of show you, of round-to-round tiers of players, and basically that this is kind of a way that you can compare yourself and to your opponents, what they took, and then kind of get an idea of like the players you want around that range where they're getting drafted. So I go 4 up and 4 down from that pick. So for example, if you're drafting 8th, which is going to be the example in this video, you're going to range your players from 1 to 4 and kind of tier them in rank order. And what I do is I put like a star or some kind of annotation like that, like double star the players below that draft range if I'm considering reaching for them in the higher round. And there are some examples of that which I will show you. And you're basically going to do this for every round, and kind of when you go ahead and prep, it gives you an idea of like who you're going to put in there. It's kind of a long, laborious process, but I think it works for me well, and it kind of gets my mind right for the draft, so I'm prepared. Then on a separate page, I kind of just write down the goal roster of the guys that I put number 1, or the guys that if they fall to me at that position, that's what I would want. And that basically being that like this is kind of the range of players that I want going into it, so I can kind of put my ideal roster together. And what I do, and I can't really demonstrate this here, but cue the players that you have as late sleepers. I will spend some videos in the next couple weeks kind of talking about those that I think are good sleeper targets to target in this draft, and start putting them in the queue, which is a function you can do in the draft and basically line up the players. Good example of that is Kareem Hunt, because he's probably going to get drafted, but he's probably going to be pretty low on the draft board because he's got a lot of potential, and a lot of people have a high opinion of the type of hype that he could give you late in the season. And then my 7th step is basically that you want to practice this as much as you can before you actually go into the draft, your real draft. Just kind of, make tiers of players. Maybe you don't have to write it down formally on the when you're doing a mock draft, but just basically kind of get this idea in your head that like you're ranking them round by round, because for me that works really well to not only take the best player available, but by doing it off of a mock draft, you're kind of getting an idea of like what your opponents are doing in terms of who they're reaching for at a high position, who is generally falling in what range of the draft. And then that way, when you kind of print everything out on paper and kind of like mark down the guys that you're looking at, it really kind of helps you get an idea of like what kind of tier of range that you want to get the guys you want. And that way you're not reaching for people like Aaron Rodgers in the 5th round like this idiot did in this video, or in this mock draft, I'm sorry. By the way, I'm not referring to myself, but I think you probably picked up on that by now that I really am not a fan of Aaron Rodgers in fantasy football. So let's go ahead, and for the purpose of this, I'm only going to go through about 4 rounds. But basically, I'm going to kind of demonstrate the tiers. So as you can see here, the star right there on 8, that's where I'm drafting. So I go up 4 to the 4th pick, and then down to 12, which is basically the range of where I want my team to go. Or excuse me, it's the range of if any of these players get reached above, or in this draft didn't get taken as high, I can basically target them as somebody that I want higher. So in the first round here, I started, and I left out like Christian McCaffrey, Saquon, and I believe Zeke Elliott was the second pick. But those guys, because I did, most likely if I'm at number 8, they're not going to fall to me in bearing some miracle. But it is realistic potentially for Kamara to fall to that point. So I rank them all then, and Alvin Kamara is number 1 for me. As I've talked about, he's part of that elite tier of running backs, which would include Melvin Gordon, but because of all the trade rumors recently, I've kind of dropped him a little bit below Davante Adams and DeAndre Hopkins. As I've said, those two are like easily my top 2 receivers. I'm very high on them. So I rank Hopkins slightly higher because of the quarterback potential stack with Deshaun Watson. But then Davante Adams is very close. So then I have Melvin Gordon. Number 5, I have Julio Jones. Number 6, I have Michael Thomas. So I like a lot of these receivers more than Le'Veon Bell, as you see, who's up at number 8. But then you start getting into the running backs that I do like, as Todd Gurley, the number 7 pick, and then Le'Veon Bell, number 8. So, and then this gets into the topic of what I was talking about with double starring. So David Johnson, as you see, there's 2 down arrows. And that's because down here you see Travis Kelce and James Conner are double starred. And basically what I do with that is I'm basically telling myself that I like Le'Veon Bell over Kelce and Conner for next year. But at the same time, I like both of them over David Johnson. So what I'm saying is that, like, let's say that I'm at a position like, this is a little more relevant if I'm picking like 11th, for example. But let's say that David Johnson is the guy they're telling me to take. I would then take James Conner over David Johnson. So I would bring him up over into that tier. And Travis Kelce is another guy that I would bring over David Johnson. But for that position, this isn't really relevant in the early rounds like this, but later on it kind of becomes more relevant. You'll kind of see an example of that. So that was the first round tier. And then I put my goal player that I want. So if you remember my goal player, that if everything falls to me, yes, it probably would be Alvin Kamara, but more realistically, DeAndre Hopkins, because he is at 8. And if you go down from 8, that's the guys that he's the top ranked of the guys left. So my goal player would be DeAndre Hopkins. So I kind of write that down, or at least give myself a mental note of that. All right, so let's take a look at the next round. And once again, I'm sorry about the quality of this. I hope you don't hold it against me or anything. So now we're into the second round. And we're at pick 20, which is where I should be drafting. So I go up 4 to pick number 16. That is the high rank of guys that could potentially fall to me, and then the low rank of guys I want to consider in that range should any movement happen of these players is number 24. So as I've mentioned several times, I really like Juju Smith-Schuster for next year. So he is my top player in this tier. Then after that, it's a close call between Tyreek Hill and Odell Beckham, but I do like Tyreek Hill a little more just because of the there's not a ton of other weapons on the Chiefs other than Travis Kelce, but in terms of receiver, it's pretty much Tyreek Hill's show. Then it's Antonio Brown is who I like next at number 4. So if any of those guys fall to me at 20, I would take them in the order that's shown. I like Mike Evans slightly over T.Y. Hilton. And then there you see a down arrow for T.Y. Hilton. And that is because I like Adam Thielen over T.Y. Hilton. I think that was kind of a high position for him there. But Adam Thielen I do like. So he's double starred here. And I put 5A because I'm basically telling myself that, like, I wouldn't take him over Mike Evans, but I would take him over T.Y. Hilton if he's still there. So that's kind of shows that. The next player I like in this tier is Amari Cooper. And then there's 2 down arrows for Keenan Allen and Dalvin Cook because I like Leonard Fournette over both those players. So Fournette, I would not take over Amari Cooper, but I would take him over Keenan Allen and then Dalvin Cook in that specific order. So that of all this, my top ranked player of my goal would be Juju Smith-Schuster, but if he doesn't fall to me, then the next one would be Mike Evans. So let's go to the next round. And I leave a couple of these papers out because you'll kind of see the importance of this later on. But Okay, so now we're in round 3. The pick that I would be drafting at is pick number 32. So the guy that I most like at this draft tier from 28 to 36 is Aaron Jones. He was reached for pretty high in this, which, I mean, I think that's justified because I think will have a good season. So Aaron Jones, if he can fall to me, would be my top. And then after that, I would want to take, in order, I would take Nick Chubb. And then I would take George Kittle. I think George Kittle is probably going to not fall to me because he's that high. But then after that, George Kittle, Devonta Freeman, Brandon Cooks. So now what happens? So if you see here, the next one that I have is Marlon Mack. And this is what I'm talking about, why you want to leave a couple pages out. So notice that there are 2 arrows down, and that is because basically what I'm saying is that there's 2 players in the lower rounds that I like more than that position that Josh Jacobs is at. And that is, I like Marlon Mack to go in before him at 5A. So Marlon Mack I would take next after Brandon Cook. But then let's go to the next round, round 4. And if you see here, Kerryon Johnson is sitting there. He's at 5B. So, and I've already basically told myself that Kerryon Johnson slipped in this draft. I would take Kerryon Johnson over Josh Jacobs. So basically, like this kind of helps protect you. So that way, if these people slide that could be sleepers, then in this mock draft format, then you can kind of know that you want to reach for them earlier. So I'm telling myself that Kerryon Johnson is good enough that I would consider him within this 3rd round tier. Because I think he's a better pick at this point than Josh Jacobs is. I think he's a better pick than Patrick Mahomes is. And so then now I drop another position because I would take Derrick Henry at 7A. So I would take Derrick Henry not over Patrick Mahomes. I think Patrick Mahomes I would take over Derrick Henry, but I would take Derrick Henry over Julian Edelman. Because of, as I've discussed, I think New England wide receivers are very unpredictable. So Julian Edelman is 8th on this tier, but he's lower than 3 players that I've labeled. And then I put a big X by AJ Green because I just think with the injury news out here, there's just too many risks there. So I'm just not taking AJ Green at all. I'm just telling myself that because then what I would start doing is I would just start looking at these other positions. But I don't really think that'll be an issue for me because at least one of these guys will be around before AJ Green. So next page right here, we're going into round 4. So I've already talked about Kerryon Johnson. Kerryon Johnson I would take potentially in the 3rd round if he falls to me there. But at pick number 44, they're telling me to take Sony Michel, which I've expressed my dislike of that guy as a fantasy football player multiple times on this show. The guy that I would take if he falls to me for some reason or another is Kerryon Johnson. And then next I would take Kenny Golladay. And Kenny Golladay is somebody that I would take over AJ Green at this point, so that's why he's double starred. So AJ Green is somebody that would fall below Kenny Golladay. And then next I would take Stephon Diggs, who is the guy that I actually did end up taking at that position. So there's Stephon Diggs there. And then you start getting into the next round of players. So although Damian Williams has potential with the Chiefs, I think that I do like Phillip Lindsay and Chris Godwin more than him. So I put in order 3A Phillip Lindsay, so falls below Stephon Diggs, but the next guy up, and then Chris Godwin. So those are both guys I would take out of the 5th round group and bring them up into the 4th round over Damian Williams. And so Damian Williams 4, Deshaun Watson 5. I think I like Deshaun Watson, but that's a little high for him. So then 6, I had Cooper Kupp. And then at number 7, I had Alshon Jeffrey. And then I already X'd out Sony Michel, and then I don't know why this guy took Aaron Rodgers at number 48. That was just such a bad draft pick. So I just put a big X through him because I'm not going to draft him if he's that high. I probably won't draft him at all because somebody's going to take him this high and it'll be dumb. But anyway, so I do this in advance. Like for me, like I'm very methodical and I really like writing things down and kind of keeping things like very organized. So, you know, basically like what I did is I took all that group and I basically just kind of do this round by round because it kind of lets me know like who I want at that position, and then it kind of keeps me in a mindset as the draft is going on of like who do I take next in this round. So when it's complete, what I do is I create my goal roster, and these are the guys that were pretty much the top ranked people in that tier. I took out Alvin Kamara round 1 because he's not going to fall to me at 8. But so my goals for the first 4 rounds would be to get DeAndre Hopkins, Juju Smith-Schuster, Aaron Jones, and Kerryon Johnson. So, and I do this basically, when it all happens in reality, I'm probably not going to get those 4, but this is ideally what I want. And if you go back to like the question that Nathan asked earlier about whether or not I should take receivers early or running backs early, this kind of shows you here that like I would much rather shore up with good wide receivers like DeAndre Hopkins and Juju Smith-Schuster than in a later round take a guy like Cooper Kupp who's got injury questions, or like Alshon Jeffrey who's not consistent. And then, but get like guys that are going to give you consistent points all the time. And then you get up and coming running backs like Aaron Jones and Kerryon Johnson that don't have the hype of guys like Le'Veon Bell or David Johnson, but probably might even have better seasons than them potentially. So that's personally what I do. I'm going to go back and show you the overall draft steps just as kind of a rehash, but what I would encourage you to do is if you're doing mock drafts is kind of use this strategy because it really works for me very well. And it's kind of like, like you don't go into a test in a school without having done the questions beforehand, like chemistry, like you got to do like the reactions and really like practice it so that way you get a chance to really hone your skills and be prepared for the test so you don't get overwhelmed. So it's kind of the same mindset with this, like go through a methodical step-by-step process, and it'll really help you have a plan for your mock draft and really put you in a position to pick guys where they should be picked, and even label the guys that you think that you should potentially take at the end of the draft. So as a rehash, the number 1 step is to do a mock draft. The second step is to print it out. Third step is to, when you go into that next draft, preferably another mock draft, but maybe if you're doing it in your live draft, is see where you're drafting, and then make a little board of the guys around there. And the best part is that if you've already done this on a mock draft, you can just take those same papers into the next draft, and you already kind of have an idea of like who you're going to take there anyway. So go off those mini draft boards as I kind of explained with the 4-up, 4-down method and double starring the players. And then, write down your goal roster, cue the guys that you want that are sleepers, like Blake Bortles. All right, no, that was a joke. You don't want to cue him. But anyway, and then you practice this, and hopefully this will kind of help you have the perfect draft that you want. So yeah, so that's what I do. I'd encourage you to try to do it too. And in the next couple of videos, I'm going to be doing some more mock drafts and then kind of go through some of these sleepers that I think you should start queuing. So anyway, yeah, let me know if you have any questions, and feel free to comment or share your opinions about it. So yeah, all right, talk to you later. Bye.